almost there. Last note could have been better. Welcome back to another video, YouTube. I've been teasing and talking about this forever, like literally, I don't know, 5 years, something like that, about talking about my journey of improvement. How have I gotten better? What have I worked on? Blah, blah, blah. What level have I achieved in trombone playing? All that kind of stuff. And this is going to be the start of probably a couple videos about this exact topic because I have gotten a lot better and I want to share some of that journey. We don't need to know all of it because it's a long and torturous journey, and we'll talk about how torturous it was later in this video. But we can talk about some of it. In a future video, I'm going to talk more about the specifics. What things that I do to get better? What things did I play? What do I think about when I'm playing slurs? Weird little intricacies like that that are really applicable to trombone specifically. This video is going to be more about the generalities of improvement. What made me realize I needed to? What around me gave me that impetus? What general things did I do to find those small things to do? So let's talk about that. Number one is identifying players that I enjoy and then figuring out what they do to achieve it. So a few years ago, I like won a couple small auditions. I had finished my master's degree, and I was like, dang, I'm really good. And then I realized I was out in the real world. I wasn't nearly as good as I thought. I had these players around me who were just so good. They could just pick up their horns in the morning, 7 a.m., and just like make good sounds. Stuff that I couldn't do. And I was like, what is that? What does that person do? How can that person just play really high, really easily? How can that person make such a fat sound below the staff? Blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of these different things, right? And it's, one, really fun, and two, better in person, but is possible to do over the internet, for instance. There's a lot of players that I watch on YouTube. My computer's right here, so that's the reference I'm pointing to, that you can watch and you can listen to them, watch what they're doing, and really try and figure out how they're making the sounds they make. But always realize that you're listening through a microphone, through a codec in YouTube, which is usually not super great, and then listening back out through perhaps, phone speakers or whatever. So you're losing a lot of the information that comes out of the bell and etc. It's best to do this live. It's just not always an option. And luckily, I have a lot of people around me that I get to play with on a regular basis live, and it just is such a useful tool because I get to sit next to these people and be like, wow, those articulations are amazing. I can kind of feel how they're doing that, and I can give myself a small goal of like, I need to push my playing this direction. So the first step of that, of course, is to identify this person, right? I play next to them. What part about their playing is attractive? Sometimes it's not, not everybody out there is amazing, but there's almost always something that you're like, oh, wow, their time is impeccable. I can tell my time is like, yeah, it's fine, but their rhythms are just perfect. How are they achieving that, right? How do they warm up? What are they doing when they pick up their horn the first time? Are they like pounding out a bunch of really loud stuff? Or are they playing really softly and just sussing out what their face is doing and using the air to get the sound moving, for instance? How do they approach learning something? They get something new in their music. Do they sit there and they go, and they play it wrong, and they're like, good enough, it'll happen in the concert? Or do they sit there and play it like 1,000 times? They do it slowly, and then they speed it up. Maybe they play it down an octave. Little things like that will really inform you like, oh, I should probably be doing that. So that's a big part of it, figuring out a direction to go, right? Otherwise, you have no goals, really. You just are trying to get better, but how exactly? So now you have a direction to go. You still have to put in time. I put in a lot of time, not necessarily just sitting in here playing for 4 hours in a row, but, there are definitely days like that. And a lot of that is figuring out fundamentals that I suck at, which, of course, there are a lot, and then just attacking them head on. There's a while where I was really afraid, for instance, to play lip slurs because I just was not comfortable playing them. And then at some point in the last probably like 6 months, I was like, you know what? I should probably just play slurs to get better at them. And that's been a lot of my route to improvement. We'll talk about that in the next video. The term "hug the cactus" from Jeremy Wilson. He's like, if you suck at something, don't just kind of like put your blinders on and avoid it. Go, you know what? That thing over there, I'm just gonna, ouch, this really hurts, but I need to do it. You've got to work on those things that you suck at. And identifying them and being honest with yourself and being like, yes, I need to work on that is one of the harder things about improving. Of course, once I figure out those fundamentals that I suck at, I really try to play music. I try to play etudes. I try to play duets, stuff like that, where it applies those fundamentals to real life, or at least closer to real life. And then, once I get out into the real world doing gigs, I really try and ingrain these new habits and not just fall back on old, probably worse habits and just kind of kiss all that improvement goodbye, which has definitely happened many times. We'll talk about that in a moment. So, 2 giant general takeaways from my years-long journey, this specific one. Number 1, the work that you put in, that time we were talking about just now, even if you think you suck, it still counts. So, for instance, throughout the pandemic, I played my butt off. I practiced 3 hours a day, every day of 2020, 2021, before things started back up again. Because I was like, you know what? I'm not very good, and I'm not going to get this kind of time to practice for a long time. I have a lot of friends, and I'm not throwing shade here by any means. I have a lot of friends who did not use that time to practice. And honestly, just judging them by their skill level and judging me by my skill level, they didn't need to put in that time. They already had a lot of basics figured out, and yeah, they could have put in time and grinded out some improvement, but they didn't need to the same way that I definitely did. Now, the problem is I didn't really play very well throughout 2020, 2021. I made some improvement, but the point is I just put in so much work. It seemed a little bit useless at the time. I was like, I'm not playing with other people. I'm not playing gigs. I'm very slowly getting better. But all of that practice has paid off. It's kind of crazy. Every time I make a big breakthrough, I'm like, wow, all that time I spent, I read the entire Bordoni book, all 120 etudes, minus the alto clef ones. I skipped those. I read every single one of those in a row in the space of like a month and a half during the pandemic. And I played them like complete butt at the time. But that made a big difference. Actually putting in that time doing something like that, even though I didn't do it super well, I still get like 60-70% of that improvement the next time I make a big breakthrough. So even though it feels like you might just be hitting your head against the wall, you're just doing the same thing over and over again, you will not regret having done that work down the road. There's a lot of stuff like that. Like I put a lot of time into playing contrabass over the pandemic, just kind of getting more comfortable with the weird tuning that it has and like, playing in a different key and reading music. And I did not play contra super well for a lot of that time. But once I got a lot better and contra feels way better now, I can just play it. I can just look at a note and be like, yep, that's both valves, second position, boom, that's a G. Instead of going, G here. I put enough time in, even though I couldn't play that well now, I can just do it. So that practice you put in, even if you're not perfect at the time, is how you get better. And that's, generally a takeaway, right? Practice is not about being the best right now. It's about slowly grinding your way to becoming better later. It's a delayed gratification, right? The second giant takeaway is that progress always comes in peaks and valleys. Sometimes those valleys will be way deeper than the peaks before them. You're like, wow, getting a lot better. I got sick and I didn't play for a week. And then you have to go back out of the valley again. And this is just a general thing. I think it happens to everybody. And it's hard to see from a valley. You're like, oh my God, how am I this bad when the last week I was playing so well? It's hard to see from that the general trend of this progress is always in an upward line. There are very few people, if you're putting in time and like actually care about playing, that you're just getting worse over time unless you literally just don't practice. That line always trends up. The average always goes up. Even if you zoom in, it looks like this and there's like a bunch of dips and stuff. You want to zoom out and be like, oh, wow, like a year ago, I couldn't play this scale at all. And right now, it doesn't feel great, but I can play the whole thing in 2 octaves, like dozens of times. That's a big difference, and you have to realize that. That's how the improvement works. This is the whole reason that I have my playing journal. Every time I make a little breakthrough, I write it down. Because if I don't write it down, I'll forget about it, and I go into a valley. But the cool thing about the peaks and valleys is that when you get into a valley, and sometimes you'll realize it before you hit the bottom, you're like, oh, I'm actually doing some bad habits right now. Let's look. And then you're like, oh, I'm not doing that thing. And you can just go, oh, just kidding, back on the train again, heading back up to a peak. And the other thing about it is when you get to the bottom of that valley and you're like, oh boy, I really wish I was playing like I was last week. That's when you learn the most, when you have to climb out of that and be like, oh, I was relying on just kind of my natural air, for instance, but I actually need to do this, and that will make this thing work, for instance. So climbing out of those valleys is really where a lot of that improvement comes. If you were somehow like a robot machine and you literally just got better all the time, that would be very neat, and I'm sure there's some people like that out there, but I don't think there's a lot. You really learn from those spots where you backslide, and you actually have to realize what you did to make that previous improvement. And that's when you eclipse the previous improvement. I think a good example would be someone like Joe Alessi recently got Bell's palsy, which is paralyzation of the nerve of one half of your face. So I think for him it was his right, left side, I don't know, who cares? Doesn't matter. One side of his face did not work. Like he couldn't close his eye, he couldn't close his mouth. It was all just drooping, right? Really hard to play that way. You can't do it. But he, like got some treatment, blah, blah, blah. Had some doctors help him with like muscles and stuff. And he slowly came back, and now he's playing arguably better than he ever has. Because that process of, just kind of riding how good he has been for a long time, he's definitely making improvement, but it's been pretty slow for like the last 20 years. He's amazing. Having it go, boom, rock bottom, you can't play anymore at all, to, oh, this is how I did this, this is how I did this, this is how I did this. He actually becomes a more efficient player. Someone like Colin Williams, the assistant principal trombone of New York Philharmonic, he was an amazing player for a long time. He went to, just totally forgot the name of it, Curtis, there we go. Amazing school, won the job in Atlanta, blah, blah, blah. And then he got a playing injury and really messed up one of his lips. I'm not sure the specifics of his injury, but he basically couldn't play to the level that he wanted to for a while. And so he went, improved, and had to climb out of this valley again. And now he willingly admits, like, oh yeah, I'm a much better player than I was before the injury because I had to figure all those things out from scratch. And that makes him a better player and a better teacher. So, moral of the story is improvement takes a long time, takes a lot of work, and even though it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps back, or 3 steps back, that's part of the journey, and it will make you better in the end. That's all I got for now. I'll make a specific video about what I've done to become better on trombone specifically later, but that's all I got for now. Bye.